The sun fell low behind the mesas, turning the horizon into a bleeding ember. A lone rider crossed the empty stretch of earth, his shadow long and solemn against the dying light. The townsfolk called him the giant cowboy, though his name, Elias Boone, age 30, sounded softer than the legend that followed him. He had buried his wife 3 winters ago, and since then, silence had been his truest companion. Dust clung to his coat and boots, and the smell of saddle leather and smoke followed him like a ghost. He stopped at the edge of White Hollow, where the road narrowed between 2 weathered buildings. The air was thick with gossip that day. Eyes peered through cracks in saloon doors and lace curtains. Every small town had its stories, and Elias carried one heavy enough to keep tongues wagging. He tied his horse by the post and walked toward the general store, where laughter spilled faintly from within. When he pushed the door open, the bell gave a tired chime. Inside, the scent of flour and tobacco mixed with something faint and sweet, wild herbs, maybe. He turned and saw her. Winona Whitebird, age 20, stood behind the counter arranging jars of tea leaves. Her hair, dark as river silt, was braided and threaded with small white feathers. The shawl on her shoulders was mended in places, each stitch careful and proud. She looked up, and for a heartbeat the noise of the world hushed. He couldn't explain it, only that it felt like remembering a face from a dream he hadn't had yet. She met his gaze without fear, though a flicker of caution lived there, quiet but unyielding. He nodded politely. She returned a small, distant smile. That night, Elias couldn't shake her image. He sat outside the boarding house, whittling at a piece of wood until it turned smooth and shapeless. The desert wind carried the scent of sage, and with it, a question he couldn't name. Somewhere out there, in that same breath of wind, Winona sat by a small fire, humming a song her grandmother taught her, a song about rivers that remember every secret they carry. Over the following days, their paths crossed often. She came into town to trade herbs and beadwork, her baskets filled with color and care. He was usually nearby, fixing the fences near the well or helping the blacksmith move heavy iron rods. He spoke little, she spoke less. But sometimes silence has a way of stitching 2 souls together where words would only tear them apart. When she dropped a jar of honey one afternoon and glass scattered across the floor, Elias knelt beside her without hesitation. Their hands brushed as they reached for the same shard. Neither moved for a moment. Behind them, the room stilled. Miss Carver, the innkeeper, watched with a pursed mouth. A few customers exchanged looks. A white man's hand and a native woman's hand, touching, helping, unashamed. It was enough to spark 100 murmurs by sundown. That evening, Sheriff McGraw stopped by Elias's table at the saloon. "You've got the whole town talkin', Boone," he said, leaning heavy on the chair. "I'd watch where your kindness falls. Folks here don't take kindly to certain crossings." Elias didn't look up. "Then maybe folks should look away," he said quietly, and took another sip of his whiskey. Days turned to weeks. The desert shifted from gold to rust as summer began to die. Elias found himself riding near Winona's cabin by the river more often than he'd admit. Once, he found her struggling to fix a wagon wheel. Without asking, he stepped down, lifted it into place, and tightened the bolt. She thanked him softly, not meeting his eyes. "I can manage," she said, voice trembling between pride and gratitude. "I know," he said. "But it's easier with 2. She smiled then, faint and fleeting, like sunlight through smoke. But as he rode away, her voice followed him. "Don't make life harder for yourself, cowboy. A man like you deserves better than me." He didn't turn back. But the words burned slow, like embers refusing to die. One night, a dry storm rolled in, lightning without rain. It struck near the mill, and before dawn, fire was eating its way through the grasslands. Winona's cabin sat close to the blaze. When Elias saw the glow from town, he didn't think. He ran for his horse. The flames clawed at the sky, the heat fierce enough to blister skin. He rode straight into it, covering his mouth with a wet cloth, calling her name through the smoke. He found her trying to save her grandmother's medicine bag and hand-woven blanket. "Leave it," he shouted over the roar. She shook her head. "These are all I have left." He wrapped his coat around her shoulders and pulled her through the door just as the roof collapsed behind them. They stumbled down the riverbank, lungs burning, and plunged into the cold water. When they surfaced, gasping, the fire crackled above them, painting the world red and gold. Her shawl was ruined, her hands blistered. He reached for her, trembling. "Why'd you go back?" "Because memories are hard to rebuild," she whispered. He met her gaze. "So is a life." That night, the flames died, but the rumors didn't. The town woke to ashes and judgment. Someone scrawled "White Lover" across Elias's door in black paint. At the general store, Miss Carver refused him service. A man spat near his boot. Winona kept her head down when she passed through town, the weight of their stares like stones. She went to his ranch the next morning. "You should let me go," she said. "They won't forgive you for saving me." He leaned against the porch rail, jaw tight. "Forgive me," he said, half a laugh, half disbelief. "For keeping someone alive? You don't understand," she said. "You're not one of them anymore." He turned toward her. "Maybe I never was." She looked at the ground, her voice barely a breath. "A man like you deserves better than me." He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking to a heartbeat. "You're wrong," he said. "Better doesn't mean perfect. It means true." Her eyes filled, but she didn't speak. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain that never came. Then, slowly, she reached for his hand. Autumn turned to winter, and one morning, the town woke to news they didn't know how to hold. Elias Boone was marrying Winona Whitebird. The ceremony took place beneath the cottonwoods where the river curved like a smile. Half the guests came from her tribe, the rest from town, some curious, some defiant, some silent. Sheriff McGraw officiated, clearing his throat too often, as though swallowing years of prejudice. Winona wore white feathers and a dress she'd sewn herself. Elias stood beside her in a dark coat, his hat pressed to his chest. When he looked at her, his eyes held a quiet awe that words could never touch. "By the word of both land and heart," the sheriff said, "you're man and wife." Their kiss was not fire but peace, a promise spoken without sound. Around them, the cottonwoods whispered like old souls watching a curse lift from the earth. That night, under the lantern light, Winona laughed freely for the first time in months. Elias watched her across the small gathering, her joy glowing against the dark. Miss Carver lingered near the edge of the crowd, arms folded. "Maybe love don't need permission after all," she muttered. Winter came early. Snow laid its hush across the plains, the kind that turns sound into memory. Inside their small home, Winona hummed by the fire, and Elias mended his gloves by the window. They didn't need many words now, just the soft rhythm of belonging. One evening, she stepped outside, the horizon fading pink. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Regret what?" "Choosing me. Losing your place among them." He smiled faintly, brushing snow from his sleeve. "You think I ever belonged to them? I belong to this land, this light, and to you." Her eyes glistened. "You still don't understand," she whispered. "A man like you deserves better than me." He cupped her face, his hands rough, his voice steady. "Winona," he said, "in my heart it's only you." The wind fell silent, as though even the earth wanted to listen. The fire inside crackled softly, warm against the cold night. Years later, travelers passing through White Hollow would see two graves under the cottonwoods, side by side, carved with the words, "Elias Boone and Winona Whitebird, together the river runs quiet." And sometimes, when the dusk turns gold and the wind bends low, you can almost hear them whisper, reminding anyone who'll listen that love isn't about what you deserve. It's about who your soul recognizes in the firelight and chooses, again and again, even when the world looks away.